The wedding was a spectacle, a merger of two of the city's most influential families, but for me, Paloma, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The grand ballroom of the De Luca estate glittered under the weight of 1,000 crystals, each one reflecting a lie. I stood near the terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief from the suffocating pleasantries inside. I knew my new husband, Santiago de Luca, didn't love me. Our marriage was a cold, calculated business deal, a requirement in his late grandfather's will for him to inherit the multi-million-dollar construction empire, De Luca Corporation. I was prepared for a loveless marriage, but I wasn't prepared for the sheer depth of his cruelty. He found me there, a smug look plastered on his handsome face. A woman with platinum blonde hair, poured into a dress that cost more than my first car, was clinging to his arm. Her name was Zulema. Paloma, Santiago said, his voice dripping with condescension. He gestured with his champagne flute towards the woman beside him. I'd like you to meet Zulema. He paused for effect, savoring my flicker of confusion. She's my true love. Just so we're clear, he leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey, you're just my wife on paper. A signature I needed to unlock my inheritance. Don't get any ideas. Then, he turned to Zulema and kissed her. It wasn't a peck. It was a deep, passionate kiss, right there at our wedding reception, a deliberate performance for an audience of one. They both pulled back and smirked at me, a pair of predators who had just cornered their prey. They saw me as nothing more than a powerless fool, a final, pathetic obstacle they had easily overcome. They were wrong. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, chilling calm wash over me. I raised my own glass, the crystal cool against my trembling fingers, and met his gaze over the rim. The look in my eyes wasn't one of heartbreak. It was a silent promise. He thought this was his victory lap, the end of the game. He had no idea I was just making my first move. Santiago thought he had won, but he had no idea the game was rigged in my favor from the start. My mind flashed back to 1 week before the wedding, to a meeting that had changed everything. I was sitting in the imposing, wood-paneled study of my father-in-law, Arturo de Luca. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and his expensive cigars. Arturo was a man weathered by decades of corporate warfare, his eyes weary but missing nothing. He despised his son's arrogance. He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the mahogany desk towards me. My father was a brilliant man, Paloma, he said, his voice a low rumble. He saw Santiago's recklessness a mile away. He built this company from dust, and he wasn't about to let his spoiled grandson run it into the ground. Inside the folder was a copy of the will. My eyes scanned the dense legal text until I found it, a secret clause. The marriage wouldn't grant Santiago immediate control of De Luca Corporation. Instead, it would trigger a 1-year probationary period. At the end of that year, the board of directors, led by Arturo, would hold a vote. They would decide who was best suited to lead the company into the future. My shares, granted to me through the marriage, combined with my conduct as a member of the De Luca family, would be the deciding factor. Santiago sees you as a pawn, Arturo had told me, his gaze firm and unwavering. A necessary inconvenience. I see you as our last hope. He thinks he's playing checkers. We, Paloma, will be playing chess. I snapped back to the present, the cacophony of the party a dull roar in my ears. I watched Santiago parade Zulema around the ballroom, introducing her to business associates with a defiant grin. Each laugh, each casual touch between them, was no longer a personal sting. It was data. It was ammunition. The humiliation he intended to inflict upon me was now the very fuel for my quiet, methodical plan. I took a slow, deliberate sip of champagne. The bubbles fizzed on my tongue. The game, as Arturo had said, was on. And I intended to win. The next 2 months were a performance in public humiliation. Santiago and Zulema became the city's most obnoxious power couple, their Instagram feeds a monument to corporate funds being wasted on lavish trips to Paris, Dubai, and the Maldives. They flaunted their affair, believing I was at home, crying into my pillows. They couldn't have been more wrong. While they were sipping champagne on a yacht, I was starting my new job. Santiago, in a move of pure spite, had arranged an internship for me in the finance department of DeLuca Corporation. He wanted me to feel small, to be reminded of my place. He gave me a tiny, windowless cubicle in the basement, a place where he thought I'd wither from boredom and shame. It was the best thing he could have ever done for me. I wasn't the CEO's wife, I was just Paloma, the new intern. I arrived early, stayed late, and learned the business from the ground up. I fetched coffee, made copies, and organized spreadsheets with a meticulousness that startled my supervisors. I ate lunch in the employee cafeteria, not in some fancy restaurant. I listened to the whispers of the rank and file, the people Santiago had long ignored. I heard their frustrations about his rash decisions, their fears for the company's future. I earned their trust, and then their respect. Twice a week, I had lunch with Arturo, absorbing his wisdom, learning the intricate politics of the board. And slowly, I began to meet the other key players. One of them was Isidro, the head accountant. He was a quiet, older man who had been with the company since Santiago's grandfather was in charge. One afternoon, he stopped by my cubicle. "You have your grandfather-in-law's eyes," he said softly. He could always see the story behind the numbers. It wasn't just a compliment, it was an invitation. The invitation from Isidro came a month later. He called me into his office after hours, the vast accounting floor dark and silent around us. He didn't say much, just pushed a single expense report across his desk. "These consulting fees," he said, tapping a line item with his pen. "They seem high for a firm no one has ever heard of. Innovations Global. It was the thread I needed. That night, I didn't sleep. Fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering fury, I dove into the company's financials. The payments to Innovations Global were monthly, consistently large, and always approved by Santiago himself. I spent hours online, digging through corporate registries and public records. Innovations Global was a shell company, registered to an address that turned out to be a mailbox in a strip mall. The sole director listed was a name I didn't recognize, but a quick social media search revealed the truth. It was Zulema's cousin. I cross-referenced the payment dates with Santiago and Zulema's Instagram posts. A payment for $300,000 on March 12. An Instagram post from Zulema on March 13, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, caption, "Paris is always a good idea." Another payment for $500,000 in April. A week later, they were on a private jet to Dubai. It was blatant, arrogant, and utterly damning. Over 3 months, he had funneled over $1.5 million of company money into his affair. This wasn't just infidelity, it was embezzlement. The next morning, I laid a neatly organized file on Arturo's desk. He read through it in silence, his face growing harder with every page. When he finished, he looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a sorrowful anger I had never seen before. "I had hoped he would come to his senses," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But he has gone too far. This is no longer about saving my son. It's about saving my father's legacy." He unlocked his private drawer and handed me a black credit card. "Hire whoever you need. Find everything. We end this." The secret plan was no longer just a defense. It was now an all-out war. 11 months. 11 months of playing the dutiful wife in public and the corporate spy in private. The day of the annual shareholders' meeting arrived, gray and overcast, a perfect reflection of the storm that was about to break. The boardroom was an intimidating space of polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The air was thick with tension and the smell of money. I took my seat at the table, a small, unassuming figure among the titans of industry. Arturo gave me a subtle, reassuring nod from across the room. Then Santiago walked in. He was arrogance personified, dressed in a tailored suit, a confident smirk playing on his lips. And on his arm, like a trophy, was Zulema. He had the audacity to bring his mistress to the shareholders' meeting. He walked her to a guest chair against the wall, gave her a wink, and then took his place at the head of the table. He gave me a dismissive glance, as if I were a piece of furniture. His presentation began. It was a masterclass in deflection and corporate doublespeak. He presented a disastrous quarterly report, blaming unforeseen market volatility and aggressive competitor tactics. He spoke with a practiced confidence, so sure of his position, so utterly oblivious to the fact that he was a dead man walking. He finished his speech, expecting, as always, a round of polite, if unenthusiastic, applause. Instead, he was met with dead silence. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Then, Arturo de Luca stood up. His movements were slow, deliberate, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Thank you, Santiago," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel that cut through the quiet. "But this board does not accept your report." A collective gasp went through the room. Santiago's smirk faltered. "Father, I don't understand." "What you don't understand," Arturo interrupted, "is that your grandfather foresaw this day. He foresaw your incompetence. He then announced the secret clause in the will, the 1-year probationary period, and called for an immediate vote of no confidence." Santiago's face went white. Arturo laid out his son's failures one by one, the financial neglect, the disrespect to the family name, the blatant infidelity that had made them a laughingstock. "But," he said, his voice booming, "that is not the worst of it. There are truths far more damaging that my daughter-in-law, Paloma, has uncovered." He gestured to me. All eyes turned. I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice was steady as I walked to the podium. I didn't just present the evidence of the $1.5 million embezzlement. That was just the appetizer. Santiago's recklessness was not his alone, I announced, my voice clear and amplified by the room's microphone. I clicked to the next slide. On the screen, emails and recorded phone transcripts appeared. His lover, Zulema, is not just a mistress. She is a corporate spy for our biggest competitor, Rivas Construction. The room erupted in murmurs. I detailed how she had been leaking project bids and proprietary designs for months, actively sabotaging the company from within. And while Santiago was busy bankrupting this company to fund his treachery, I continued, clicking to my final slide, I was busy building its future. I presented a comprehensive plan for a sustainable, low-income housing project, a project Santiago had personally mocked and rejected. A project which, I'm pleased to announce, has already secured a $50 million contract with the city. Stunned silence. Then, Javier Mendoza, a powerful board member, stood up. "I believe the choice is clear." He looked directly at me. "I, on behalf of my fund, turn all our proxies over to Mrs. De Luca." One by one, the others followed. The dominoes fell. In less than 5 minutes, I had become the majority shareholder. The look on Santiago's face was my reward. It was a grotesque mask of shock, disbelief, and finally, a dawning, abject horror. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found only cold, unforgiving eyes. He turned to look for Zulema, but her chair was empty. She had slipped out the moment the word spy was mentioned. "Father. Paloma, you can't," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. He looked like a little boy who had just been told the game was over. Arturo simply signaled to the 2 security guards standing discreetly by the door. They moved forward, their presence a quiet but absolute finality. They flanked Santiago, who seemed to shrink inside his expensive suit. Mr. De Luca, one of them said softly. This way, please. He was escorted out of the room he thought he owned, a ghost in his own life. I stood at the head of the table, the new head, and watched him go. The power had shifted. It was absolute. That evening, I was in the CEO's office. My office. The door opened and Santiago shuffled in. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollowed-out look. He was a broken man. He rambled, begging for another chance, pleading that he had learned his lesson, that we could still make it work. I let him finish, listening in complete silence. When his pathetic monologue petered out, I slid 2 envelopes across the vast mahogany desk. He opened the first one. Divorce papers, already signed by me. His face crumpled. Then he opened the second. It was a check. A severance check, made out to him, for $50,000. He stared at it, confused. That's the amount from the prenuptial agreement you tried to force me to sign, I said calmly, my voice devoid of any emotion. I stood up, looking down at the man who had tried to ruin me. You were right, Santiago, I said, my words clear and final. I was just your wife on paper. Now, I'm your boss. I turned and walked out, leaving him alone with the ruins of his arrogance, ready to build my own empire on the foundations of his. I had won. I had justice. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the silence of my victory is all that's left, I find myself wondering, am I wrong for feeling no pity for his downfall?